Hey y'all! In the last video, we went ahead and rendered the smart contract events to the screen, allowing users to select any given event they wanted to listen to. And then we allowed them to enter a URL that we wanted the actual event information to be posted to. So where we left off was we have a function here that gets called whenever we hit this start listening button. Now, I've been putting some thought into this, and I hit a couple of problems, just a couple of design challenges where, okay, if we write this information out to, say, a database, and then we have, if we go back to our architecture diagram here, we have this backend watcher reading everything in the database. What if we wanted to go back and see all the events that we're listening for? So that led me to think, hey, we need some type of user authentication here. We want to be able to go back and see all of the things we set up. So that led me to think, hey, how should we do user authentication? Should we do it just purely Web3 with just connecting your wallet and we associate a wallet address to the actual event listeners? That's one way to do it. Or we can have a more traditional username and password login that we can then have, a user database. Now, I would be interested to explore both ways. We can certainly do it both ways, but as I dove into the database layer, and kind of a goal of not having to set up any type of servers or anything like that for supporting something like this, I was drawn towards Firebase. And I've used Firebase for a couple of applications in the past, and it's a really easy tool to kind of get up and running with, and it comes with really robust user authentication. You can have different providers like hooking up a GitHub auth or something else, or just having username and password authentication. It also has a really strong real-time database system or database layer that is it's a NoSQL layer that allows us to basically just write JSON documents to it, and then on the back end we can listen to them. So I think for this project, this technology seems to make sense, and it seems to fit into the database layer and also the user authentication layer. So what I'd like to do in this video is get to the point where we can actually write a document to a database. But before we get there, let's go ahead and set up basic user authentication. Now, I did a couple of things already before this video. For one, I did set up a Firebase project. Super simple to do that. You can go ahead and log into Firebase, create an account on Firebase, and then create a new application. Once you have the application, you'll see this interface here, and you can set up both the firestore database and the authentication. So authentication is going to give you the capabilities to be able to create user accounts. Now, once that's set up, there are a couple of things we need to do in our project in order to get Firebase into it. Now, I did modify the environment variables that are in our application so that it brings in all of the specific application ID information for what I created on Firebase. But if you were to do this yourself, you would have different IDs, obviously, and things like that. And you can see that when you're in the Firebase application by clicking this gear and going to project settings. That'll show you all that information. Now, if we go back to the project here, this is where we left off, right? So we have this data. We're ready to now send it to the back end. Now, before we do that, let's go ahead and set up user authentication. Now, there are a few components here to set this up, and I'm going to go ahead and try to do this as quickly as possible. So the first thing we want to do is let's open up a new terminal, and I'll do this right in VS Code. I'm going to say new terminal, and we're going to want to bring in a couple of dependencies here. So the first thing is we're going to go ahead and say npm install Firebase. We're going to want that, and there is another library that gives us some pretty convenient functionality called React Firebase hooks. That is going to just make using Firebase all that much easier. And I think that's all we really need right now. So let's go ahead and bring those two bad boys in. And now while that's doing that, you can see here the .environment.local, I did modify to include a few more environment variables we're going to need to fill out in order for us to actually get going with Firebase. So in your regular .env.local file, you're going to want to fill these bad boys out with your information, And you can see here that we already have our Etherscan API key in here. So we're just adding some more data to this. Now, I already did this in my .env.local, and this information generally is kind of protected information, so I won't put it on the screen. But that is what you want to do to your environment local. So now we have those dependencies in there. Now what we want to do is we do want to create a new file here. We're going to create it in a new folder called Firebase. So I'm going to go here, and I'm going to create a new folder called Firebase. And inside of this folder, we're going to go ahead and create a file called clientapp.js. Now this is basically just going to set up our Firebase app and export it so that we can import it into other pieces. So the piece that we need here is we need this initialize app. Initialize app. Oop, I got to spell initialize right? And we're going to grab that from the Firebase project app. Awesome. So now we're going to go ahead and create a client credentials. And I wonder if, yeah, it's going to do this for us. Now, obviously, that's not our client credentials. So we're going to say API key, right? And our API key is going to be in our process.env.next public Firebase API key. And I'm thinking this is going to now autocomplete for us nicely. Nice. Storage bucket, message sender ID, and then our app ID. Excellent. So that should match everything we need there. Awesome. So now we can initialize our app by saying app equals initialize app, and we're going to go ahead and pass in those client credentials, and then we'll just go ahead and export that app. And I can close our terminal here. We don't need that anymore there. Cool. So that is all the information we need to be able to connect to Firebase and export an app object for us to be able to use in other components. So now, in order for us to make sure we read a user throughout our application, we can use a React.js feature called context. And context allows us to basically inject kind of a global state into our app. So a user is typically a good global state to keep because we can always check if we have a user or not. So in order to do this, let's go ahead and create a UserProvider. And we could do this by just doing a similar thing that we did with the Firebase directory here. I'm going to create a new, not in Firebase, out here. I'm going to create a new directory, and I'm going to call it providers. Now, there are many different ways to design and structure an app like this. And again, I'm always open for feedback and improvements here. So if I'm doing something that you're like, hey, we could do it better, I'd love to hear it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file here called userprovider.js. And what this file is going to do is it's going to be responsible for basically providing that global state for us, right? So there'll be a couple of pieces we need here. We're going to need our get auth. And we're going to grab that from Firebase auth. We're going to use that router, use router. That's part of Next.js, which is a nice little tool for us to be able to send users where we want, when we want. Of course, we're going to need React. We're going to take use effect and use state. Actually, I don't think we're going to use state, so I'm going to keep that out for now. And we're going to go ahead and import use auth state from that project React Firebase hooks. This is going to allow us to basically just grab the user information pretty easily. Awesome. So that should be everything we need. We also want to grab that app object we just created. So we're going to go ahead and grab that from the client app. And we can also now, using create context, which we didn't import, but I think we're okay if we do this. So if we say export const user context, and look at that. Yeah, we want to do that, right? So that's looking good. The user will be null, and we don't really even need to create a user object in there, so to say. They could just do that, right? Okay, cool. So now we need to define our provider, and our provider is going to take children because we're going to be able to have nested components within this, which is great. So let's see. this is trying to autocomplete a bunch of stuff for us. And I think it actually might make sense. Yeah, this pretty much makes sense. So let's go ahead and let that do its thing. And we're using the use effect, which we did import, right? And we're saying, hey, if there's an error, we're going to console log the error. We're using effect twice. We're saying if it's loading. Oh, we're using effect a couple times. Okay, that's fine. If we have a user, we'll go ahead and do that, which is, okay, we could do that. Or we could say this, which if we don't have a user, go to /user, right? So we can prompt the user to log in. Yeah, and that should be it. I would probably change this to maybe return a loader if this is the case, instead of just console logging this stuff. But we can keep it like this for now. Okay, excellent. So, and we can also just export this right here, right? So we'll go ahead and say export const user provider. Okay, so now we should have a user provider, and that user provider can use the authentication state from Firebase and allow us to inject that user into our application. So how do we actually use that now? Now to use that, what we can do is we can modify our index page, and our index page is going to now use the user provider. So what is that going to look like? So if we go here to pages and then index, and now instead of doing what we're doing here, it's going to be the same thing, but what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this in user provider. All right, this whole thing is going to get wrapped in a user provider. Everything. All right, we could take this and just make it look a little nicer there. Okay, so now it's all inside of the user provider. Now by default, because it's in the user provider, if the user does not exist, this should fire and send us to /user. Now, /user doesn't actually exist yet, so it's probably going to break the app, I would assume, right? Yep, look at that, it did. So if we go back to the root, boom, it sends us to /user, and everything's broken. Okay, so what do we do? So now we need to actually create a user, or create some components for a user. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new directory here, and we'll call the, oh, you know what, this is going to be in the pages, right? So we'll create a new directory here called user, right? We'll call it user, and then inside of the user, let's create two files. We'll create an index.js. So we're going to need a way to create a user, and we're going to need a way to create a new user, right? Or create a user and log in as a user. So I'm going to go ahead and say new file, and we'll say new.js. Now these components are going to be very similar. One is going to log a user in, and the other is going to create the user. So this is just going to be a basic login page, and let's go ahead and import React. We're going to use effects. If I can type, use effects, and we're going to go ahead and use state as well. Cool. And we're going to need that app again from the client app, so we'll go ahead and bring that bad boy in. We'll import get auth, and we'll import sign in with username and password, which I don't think actually comes from, oh, we're going to use that hook though. We're going to go ahead and use, instead of this piece, we still need get auth. We'll import our router again and use, actually we don't need router, we just need use router from next router. And then we're also going to use this hook from use sign in with from here. Awesome. That should be all the tools we need to get the job done here. Now let's go ahead and export default function login, and we're going to need some state. So we're going to use an email, we're going to need a password, we're going to also need our authentication, so we'll say get auth with passing in the app. This is going to give us all of the authentication services we get from Firebase right out of the bat. And then we're also going to use this hook. Now this hook is pretty cool. It gives us a function to sign in with email and password. and a couple of state information for what's going on, the actual user object, if it's loading, and an error. And all we have to do is give it the auth object we just used. So that should be good to go. And then let's go ahead and create a router too, because we want to be able to move the user around. So if we use an effect now, and I want to say if we have a user and maybe we're not loading, then go to the root screen. So if you're already logged in, you don't need to be here. We could go ahead and send you right to the pages we need to. Now, a future enhancement, obviously we're going to have to go through some pretty extensive UI changes, and we'll change the design around a bit, but we probably want to add some type of error reporting back to the user, like a toast or something like that, that shows the user that there is a problem. Right now we don't really have that, so I'm just going to say, hey, if we have an error, I'm going to go ahead and just console log it, and if we're loading, I'm going to go ahead and console log it. And again, we can also put like a nice little spinner in here, but for now I'll just keep it like that. Okay, so now we just need to actually render a login screen. So I'm going to go ahead and return, and we'll go ahead and return, say, a div, and let's get a little tailwindy on this bad boy. We'll make it a grid, we'll make it the height of the screen, and I think we want to place the items in the center. Yeah, let's place the items in the center. And I'm going to make the background a slate color of 200. Okay, boom. Okay, awesome. So now we should have a little grid with the header on there. We could probably see, what are we complaining about here? We can't resolve ... Firebase. Because I think I'm 2 levels deep, right? So this is going to be 2 up, right? There we go. So we shouldn't really see anything on this screen yet because we're not doing anything. But now let's go ahead and add some more stuff here. So I'm going to add another division here, and I'm going to say it's a grid as well. I don't want it to be like this. I'm going to say the width is going to be half the screen. Let's give it some padding. We'll make the background white, and there's a couple of nifty little things we could do here. So we could say like, hey, round the corners a little bit. We'll make some rounded, and we'll make a shadow behind it. So these are all little cool things you can do with Tailwind by not even touching CSS, which we haven't touched any CSS yet, guys. That is pretty crazy. So that's cool. So let's go ahead and let's put a little header in here that says log in. That sounds good to me. And then we're going to go ahead and put another division in here to give it a little bit of padding. And let's go ahead and do that. And now we need to put in our input. So I don't want a label, I want my input. And that looks like it's probably okay. On change, we're going to set the email. Excellent. All right. Okay, look at that. It looks like it's coming along. All right, so we got that. I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and this is going to be the same thing, but this is going to be a type of password, and we're going to say password, and instead of setting the email, we're going to set the password. Excellent. All right, so now we just need a button. So let's go ahead and do the same exact thing, and instead of this, we're going to go ahead and create a button. And yes, it's going to go ahead and call sign in with email and password, with the email and password. And that's it. So there we go. Now we have a nice little login screen. Now what we could do is we could do the same exact thing. And this should call sign in. So it should call the sign in and get that going on. Now we don't actually have any users yet. So we need to be able to create a user. So we're going to do the same exact thing. I'm going to copy this whole thing and go into new and paste it in there. And this is going to be a user creation page. Now instead of sign in with username and password, we're going to go ahead and use create. So let's go ahead and change this to use create with email and password. and it's going to do the same exact thing, same exact pattern here, but instead of logging in, we're going to go ahead and create. So this looks good. We're going to do the same exact thing. It's really the same exact thing. I'm going to say, whoops, I'm going to say create user. And then here I'm going to say create user with email and password. And now we should be able to go to the create page, or the new page here, and I'm going to go ahead and redirect the user here on this page if they want to create a new user. So we'll put a little div in here that says, let's see, what do we want to say here? New here. Go ahead and create an account. So now if we go to user, we should have a new here, create an account, and this is going to crash on us. Cannot access before initialization. Okay, so we're doing something wrong here in the new. So let's see. So I think this piece is looking pretty funky. What are we doing wrong here? So sign in, we don't want the sign in. We want the new. So create user with email and password. It's not use here. It's just going to be create this piece, right? And then we call that down here. Yep, okay, that should do it. So now create user, log in, create account, create user. We need to change this button name too, right? So new, we're going to change this to, let's change this to create user. Okay, awesome. So now we need to test this bad boy out. So let's go ahead and say we need a new account. I'm going to say test1234 at test.com, test123, whatever. We'll just put whatever in there. Create user. And boom, we got redirected to the root page, which we can now go ahead and create some stuff. So we should see in Firebase, if we go to the Firebase console, and I may have a couple of test users in here already. Yeah, look at that. So boom, we have our test user in here. So we're writing users to the Firebase user database. Awesome. And we're detecting them, and we see them here. Now, this isn't great because we don't actually know we're logged in or not. So why don't we just quickly add a little button for us to go ahead and log in and log out. So let's go back here, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new directory here. We're going to create a new directory in our root directory called components. And in the components directory, I'm going to create a new file called user button. Now this guy's probably going to change in the near future as we kind of make the UI a little bit nicer than it is now. And this is just going to be a simple component that allows a user to log out. Okay, this way we can test multiple users. So we're going to go ahead and import get auth. And I think there's another piece here called sign out. And we're going to use those contexts too, right? We're going to go ahead and grab the user from the context. Oops. Use context. And my son may be screaming in the background here. So we're going to grab the user context, and we're going to also import the app, right? So awesome. So we've got all that. And now we'll say const user button, and we do want to go and get the user, so we'll say const user is equal to use context for the user context, and we want to get the auth too, and then if the user is logged in, display a log out button. So if user, boom. That's all we want to do. All right. And now we want to kind of add a little bit of styling to this, and we'll go ahead and export this right down here. User button. Excellent. So now let's go ahead and add a little styling to this. So we're going to say the button has a class name of Okay, we're going to add a little styling to this. So let's go ahead and add a little padding. We'll add a little margin. And let's give it a border too. So we'll give it a solid border and we'll give it a little thickness. We'll say border 2. Awesome. So now we're not actually using this component yet, right? We need to go ahead and put this into our app. So why don't we go ahead and put that right on the index page, maybe at the top. So let's go to our index page here. And right at the top here, we do want to do it within the user provider because we're using the user context. And we're going to create a quick little div here. Whoa, a div. And we'll give it a class name. Let's give it a little bit of layout here. So we'll say flex, and then we'll justify everything to the end. Okay, so it'll push everything over to the right for us, anything that's inside of this. And what we're going to put inside of this is going to be our user button. Awesome. Now, I don't know if that automatically imported it for us. It should have, but it didn't. If I type user, if I do this, it'll import it, and then we can take it out. And that should do it automatically. There we go. So now if we go back here, boom, we have a little log out button over here. So if I click log out, it should actually log me out and then take me to the login screen. Boom. It worked. All right, cool. So now let's try to log in. So let's see if I can remember a test account I have here. Boom. All right. Just like that, we have multi-user support. So that was what, maybe 20 minutes or so? I know this video might be going a little longer than I'd like, but we do need this piece, I think. And maybe in a future video, we can explore what this would look like if we did this pure Web 3 with just a connect your wallet type of thing. But now what we want to do is, now that we have a user, now we come back to this line here where we want to go ahead and build an object to send to the backend. Now, I've been experimenting with this a little bit, and using the Firebase firestore here, I think makes sense. So what we want to do is, if we look at this firestore database, which I already have set up, I have this collection set up called listeners, and we can write listeners to this. This is completely made up, and we're putting a data structure in this collection that looks like this. So we have the contract address, the actual event we're listening to, and then the URL we want to post to, and then we're going to go ahead and tag the user ID of the user that created this. This is going to give us the capability to be able to go back and say, hey, let me show you a list of all of the different event listeners you have set up. Awesome. So now we can go ahead and go to the front end and see how we can get this going on. So the first thing is we need to actually create this data structure and make it look that way, shape the data, right? So what we'll do is we'll create a const listener, and let's go ahead and make it an object, and we need a contract key, right? And that's going to be the contract address, which we already have. And now we're going to have the event, which is this. We don't want just the name. We want the whole bad boy. And then we're going to say URL, which we already have, and then the user. Now we don't actually, I'm not sure we're using the, oh, we are using the user, right? But we may have to bring this in. So if we're going to say user.id. So this is a user object. The user object is specific to Firebase, of course. So there's different properties that we can access. The ID is one of them. Actually, I think it's not ID, it's UID. That's that unique identifier. And now at this point, we should have a listener. So we can go ahead and console.log the object and see what it looks like. Now, I think we may need to use the user up here. I don't think we grabbed that yet, right? We don't. So what we could do here is we could say const user is equal to, and we're going to use the use auth state right here. This is one of those hooks that are in that React hooks project. And we do want to use get auth so that we can get the authentication, and that'll import that for us, and we'll grab our app. Awesome. So now we should have the user when we hit this function. Let's see if it works. So let's go back here. Let's go here. We are logged in. I'm going to go ahead and grab our favorite Moonbirds contract again, paste that in there. Next, we get all of our events. We're going to list for the nested events. Let's go ahead and open up our console and hit start listening. And boom, look at that. So now we have the object with our contract the event, the URL, and the user. Looking good. Excellent. So now we just need to get this data into a database so that we can read it. Excellent. So let's go ahead and do that. Now to write to Firestore, it's actually pretty easy. And for some reason, I keep having to reference the APIs and things. They just went through a different versioning where it's a modular version where you kind of have to explicitly bring in certain things instead of having this kind of like monolithic object that has all of the features like the mega Swiss Army knife. I think this is for, efficiencies in like tree shaking and minification and things like that. So what we can do now is, let's see if we can do this by just bringing in what we need kind of automatically. We need our database. So we need a database object. And what we could do is we can use this get firestore function. And I think we have to, there it is. I think we have to bring this in from Firebase. So there's going to be a bunch of things we need to bring in from Firebase. So let's go up. Did it actually bring that in for us? I didn't think it did. So let's go here. And we're going to say import. We need to use a collection. We're going to need to use a doc. We need to use get firestore. And we need to use set doc, which is going to allow us to set a document. And I think that's all we need. We don't need update doc. Not yet, at least. Okay, excellent. So those are the pieces we need. We're only using the Firestore piece just yet. And now what we can do is we can get we have the database. Now we can get our collection. So we need to get a reference to the collection. In this case, the collection was the listeners collection. So it's called listeners, and we're going to use the DB, and we're using this collection method. Now, with all this information in hand, we can go ahead and post this doc to Firestore and see if it works. So we're going to use set doc, and we're going to go ahead and pass this in. Actually, this autocomplete looks pretty good, and we'll console log that, and then let's go ahead and catch an error and console the error if we get it. Okay, awesome. So now this should go ahead and write this to the Firestore database for us. So let's update this right to the database. All right, so let's see if it works. So let's go here, and I'm going to hit start listening. Listener created. Excellent. So let's see. Let's do a do you see this.com. Boom, listener created. Now if we go back to our back end and we look at what was written here, test.com. Okay. I don't know if these are in any particular order. But we could do this. We can filter here. So we could say, hey, whether URL has a condition equal to do you see this.com. And boom, there it is. So now we have our events being written to the backend. Now we can use this in our backend application. So in the next video, we're gonna dive into some of the backend stuff. In this video, we introduced the idea of Firebase, and in a pretty short period of time, I went a little over on this one, we set up user authentication and the actual database layer for us to store event listeners. So if we look at our event diagram, we now have our front end, we have the API, we have our database layer, and we have a user authentication system to be able to support multiple users. In the next video, we're going to dive into the back-end event watcher and how do we actually read from that database and then read events that are firing off on chain. Super excited, guys. I hope you're having fun with this. This one was a little longer than I'd like it to be, but we did get a fair amount done. I'll go ahead and commit this code and push it up to GitHub for anybody that's interested in taking a peek. Thanks. See you next time.